Hi. So this week what we're going to do is we're going to get into working with arrays and sessions and things like that. I've powered on my web server. I've got my IP address. I've opened up my developer machine. And this is where I left off last time I was working on my developer machine. There's a couple things that I definitely don't care for. Joe's cool website. At one point I added in cool just to show that the headers work. Um, and because I'm doing the header on all pages through the template, that is persisting everywhere. So because it is just a template, what I'm going to do is I am going to go to my include, go to my header, and I'm just going to remove the word cool. I'm going to save that, and I'm going to take a look. And that looks better. So the other thing that I don't like is that my copyright is pushed up so close to the top of my countdown timer. So I was thinking that the body of my website should at least have a minimum height. So I'm going to add that style. And since that style sheet is the base style sheet that's being used on all pages, I'll be able to manipulate that without a problem. So I'm going to go to my base CSS. And that is in the main area here. So within that main area, I'm just going to give it a minimum height. And I'm just going to go 400 pixels, which is a guess. I might come back and change that. If I take a look at this, if I refresh that, I think that looks all right. So at least I have, a body here. I could have probably went 500 or something. If it's larger than that, it'll push it down towards the bottom. But for right now, I think that's a good height. Okay, so today what we're going to do is we're going to work on a new project, and we are going to call this the Magic 8 Ball. And this is going to be using both session variables as well as arrays. So we're going to use both of those, and then we're going to throw some randomness in there as well. So I need to create another menu item. So I'm just going to go into my menu. Or my navigation. And I am going to just create another list item, copying the one above. And instead of countdown, I'm going to call this Magic 8 Ball. And my folder name is going to be Magic 8. And I'm going to call the file the same thing, Magic 8. I'm going to save that. I'm going to close down the navigation. And if I refresh this, got my Magic 8 Ball in there. So if I go to the Magic 8, getting a 404, which I would have expected because I didn't create the folder or the file. So I'm going to start by creating my folder. And I'm just going to call it Magic 8. Then inside here, I'm going to do a new PHP file. It's going to be called Magic 8. Okay, so I'm going to select everything and delete it. I'm going to go into my template here. My includes template. I'm going to copy this, paste inside that Magic 8. I'm going to save that. Now if I come over here, I'm going to refresh this. So I've got my Magic 8 Ball. So this is good. Okay, so what I want to do is I'm just going to start talking a little bit about arrays. There's a couple different types of arrays that exist within PHP. So I'm just going to give myself some room up here, and I am going to create a PHP block. And basically, we know what a variable is, all right? So we do var, and I'm just going to call this equal to hello. All right, so I've got a variable here called var. I'm saying that it's saying hello. I can actually echo out the var. And I can save that. So we're just going to print that out. The rest of this is going to flow. So if I refresh this, so I see my hello up here and the rest of the page came down. Now if I wanted to, I can actually stop execution here. So within PHP there's something called exit. Opening, closing paren, it's a method because it's doing something, it's stopping flow. So now if I hit exit, the rest of this won't load. So if I refresh this, boom, that goes and then it just stops. Nothing else is going to go. So I'm printing out my var. There's another thing I can do and it's called var underscore dump. And I use this often when I'm trying to troubleshoot things. And if I look at this, if I save this and refresh this, it's letting me know that it's a string. It's got 5 digits, and then it gives me the value. So it doesn't just print it off, but it prints off like the data type and the structure and the length and stuff like that. So vardump gives you a little bit more information about the variable that you're using. So instead of doing an array that's just a variable called a var, I'm going to create a new variable here, and I'm just going to call it $ARR for array. And then I'm going to create a new instance of the array object. And there's a couple ways that we can do this. For right now, I'm going to just create an array. And then I'm going to assign a value to it. So you can see that now we have an array that's got 2 items in it. The first item, which is element 0, has the word Bob in it. The next one, item 1, has the word Steve in it. So the way this works is we can create one variable that can have many items in it. So instead of calling it ARR, it would probably be better to call it something like names. And then names can have name 0, name 1, and then what I can do is I can ECH echo out names 0. So if I save this, it'll be Bob. Bob is in element 0. So if I refresh this, I get Bob. But if I change that to element 1, I save that. Now I get Steve. So basically we have the ability to have one variable and we can put many items inside that variable. So it's basically a list that we can attach different things. This is what's called an indexed array. So we can also do the indexed array just how we did here, where we can create our array, excuse me, we can create an array object and then list items inside that array object. Otherwise, we can also do it on creation. So if I did an array, I can do, I'm going to do capital B for Bob, and then Steve. I can save that. If I refresh this, now I get the capital S, Steve, because now I am creating that array and I'm initializing the values in the array during creation. So that's what's called an indexed array. There's also something that's called an associative array, and basically what that does is that gives us the ability to give things names instead of numbers. So I've got like index 0, index 1, index 2. I could use that. But so if I wanted to do an associative array, it would go something like Bob, and then it's got like this arrow. It's like a equal sign greater than, and then that could be equal to, it's going to say day, and then Steve Smith. So instead of accessing it through the number, I can access it through a word. So if I put in the word Bob in here, then it should come up with day. Or if I put the word Steve in there, it'll come up with the word Smith. So we can use real world words to start to decide what value to pull out. Yeah, so there's two real different ways of using arrays. Typically, I use an indexed array. That's what we're going to use for this following exercise. But that would be an option. So you've got options here. Okay, so let's go back to my initial array. So it's going to undo a bunch of times. Okay, so instead of names, for the Magic 8 Ball, we want to have responses. We want to have every time we ask the Magic 8 Ball a question like, how will I do this semester? Okay, so there's certain rules that we have to do. We're asking a question. How will I do this semester? Question mark. All right, so we're going to have some rules involved. We have to have the question end with a question mark. That's going to be one of the rules. And then it's going to randomly generate a response for us. So we're going to fill in an array of possible responses. So that's going to be what I'm going to do right here. So I'm going to do a responses array, and I'm just going to fill this thing in. I'm just going to stop there. Okay, so I'm going to have 14 responses. So I'm just going to copy this. Okay, so I threw a whole bunch of them in here. Okay, so I've got 0, which is going to say ask again later. And then 1, I'm just going to make that say yes. And 2 is going to be no. And then 3, it appears to be so. And then the next one is going to be the reply is hazy. Please try again. The next one's going to be yes, definitely. Okay, and then the next one is, what is it you really want to know? Question mark. So I'm just coming up with some different responses. Outlook is good. My sources say no. Signs point to yes. Don't count on it. Cannot predict now. Okay, so I'm going to do a couple more here. Okay, so then as I see it, yes. Better not tell you now. Oops, no. The next one's going to be concentrate and ask again. Okay, so I've got a bunch of responses. Now I need to make sure that my elements are lined up, because right now I load 0, I load 1, and then I'm overriding 1, overriding. So by the time we were done with this, there really would only be 2 elements, 0 and 1. So I want these to be all separate. So I want it to be 1, 2, or I'll start with 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so I've got 15 different possible results. So I'm just going to ask the Magic 8 Ball a question. Will she date me? And it will go, it's going to randomly grab one and come up with something like, don't count on it. All right, so that's the goal of this program. So we have an array, and we need it to have a response. So I'm going to start laying out my user interface. So I'm going to turn off my exit so that way I can save this. And I need to build up my user interface a little bit. So if I refresh this, somewhere in here it's going to have like a Magic 8 Ball, ask a question button. They have to type in the question. So let's start laying that out. So I'm going to work on the user interface within this main area. So the first thing I want to do is just put like a, I don't know, I'm going to go with like an H2 or something. And it's going to say Magic 8 Ball. And then what I want to do is I want to use, boy, it's probably just going to use a P tag or something like that. And say ask a question. And below there I'm going to have an input. Type is going to be text. And after that, I'm going to want to put in a button. So that's going to be an input. My type. Actually, I'm going to make the type into a submit. And it's going to have a value. So the value is going to be on the button itself. That's just going to say ask the 8 Ball. Okay, so I'm going to save this for now. Let's take a look. Okay. So what I think I'm going to do is I need to come up with a spot that the result's going to go. So I think I'm going to put it right below the 8 Ball thing. Might see if I can pull that a little bit closer to ask the question, colon. So like here, this P tag, I'm going to put that inside of here. And then I'm going to put a break in there and just see if I can tighten that up. I could do it through CSS, but I might not have to. So I'm just going to refresh this. Okay, so that got tight. That's more what I'm looking for. I'll put a colon after the ask a question. Actually, I'm going to use title, ask question. Okay, so I think that'll look good. I think we're getting there. Okay, so I'm going to put a little bit above and a little bit below, and then I'm going to put like a marquee in here that's going to scroll. And then I'm going to make it say something like, ask me a question. So below here, I'm going to put a break. Then I'm going to put another break. Then in between here, it's going to do a marquee. That's not really a question. All right, let's see what that looks like. I'm going to refresh this. All right, so ask me a question. All right, so that looks good. That's kind of what I'm thinking here. So then I'm going to ask a question. I'm going to hit the magic 8 ball, and then the response will pop into the marquee. So there's a couple ways we can do this. So the form is going to need to submit the value of this question. So we need to kind of lay that out. So what I want to do is I want to start wiring this up for code. So where is my input? My input is here. Input type is text. I'm going to give it a name. It's going to be txt question. And then I'm also going to give it an ID of txt question. So I'm going to wrap this inside a form tag. So the way the form tag goes is anything inside the form tag will be sent up to the server. So if we think about this, I'm viewing this web page. Even though we're writing PHP, it's a .php, it's actually on my browser. So I'm viewing this web page from my browser. It is not on the web server. So when I ask the question, I type something in and hit the button. What it's doing is the form is going to take the value inside of the elements in the form tag and throw them up to the server. So that's going to be what's called a post or a get. But the form is going to be posting up to the server. So my form has different methods. And one method is get, another method is post. Those are the two common. So I'm going to do get first. And I'm just going to give it an action. The action is going to be where are we going to send it. All right, so I'll send it back to PHP, the 8-ball PHP. So if I save this and I refresh this page, will I pass? If I ask the magic 8-ball, will I pass? I click the button. It disappeared. But up here, I see magic 8ball.php question mark txt question, will I pass? So at this point, it took the value and it threw it up to the server, and then the page reloaded. And because the page reloaded, there's no value in here because that was the previous page. So my action can go to the existing page. It could actually go to a whole different page. Sometimes you'll be on like an order form, you'll fill out your information, you hit submit or process my order, and it'll take all that information, throw it to a different page. So there's a lot of different ways you can do it. So you have a get, you also have a post. So if I save that, and if I refresh this, I should have seen test up there if it was a get. A post does not send anything through the URL. So for example, if you're doing a login form, a username and password, you wouldn't want to use a get because anybody would be able to see the password inside your URL. By posting it, it's invisible. It doesn't show, but it does actually still go up to the server. We just have to peel it out of the server a little bit differently. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to peel that out of the server. So the way we get this out is I'm going to just create a variable, and I'm going to call it question. And that's going to be equal to my $_ underscore, and I'm using a post. So we have a post, or we have the underscore get. So I'm going to use the post. And then I use a square bracket, and it's array. And matter of fact, it's an associative array because it's looking for a string. And the string it's looking for is the name that's being used on the input. So we use txt question. So I'll do a semicolon, and I will put that question right inside the marquee. Yeah, I'll just actually do this. Yeah, that won't work. I'll just echo it. Okay, so I'm just going to refresh this. So I see the test up there. So if I type in Bob, hit this, I see Bob up there. So the problem with the way that I coded this is I'm able to pull the value that the user typed in out. But if I come here directly, that may not actually have a value in it. So if I do not have anything in the post, that could throw an error message. So what I want to do is I'm just going to close this, then reopen it. Then I'm going to go directly to the page. Guess I was impatient. Okay, so here we are. So I don't see anything up there, but the problem is this is not equal to anything. So what I want to do is I want to test to see if that's equal to something or not. So I can do something called the isSet test. I can say if, this is an if statement, and then inside my if, I can say is set, and then what I can do is I can see if this variable has been set. And if it's been set, then I can take it out of the variable and put it into the response. Otherwise, I can do something else, like I can say the variable is equal to blank. So where like something like this would be useful is like if I come into a website and if I'm not logged in, I could have like guest in there. But if somebody actually types in credentials and logs in, then you can have their login information in there. But the very first time you hit the website, it'll be blank. So that is set gives you that ability to say, okay, well, there might be values, there might not be values. But the only way there'd be a value is if somebody actually asked the question, typed in the button, and then it would pop in there. So what I want to do is I kind of want to start making some logic work here. So instead of, I'm going to create another variable here, and I'm going to call it answer. And the answer is going to be equal to nothing right now. But what I want to do is I'm going to take this. So the very first time I come in, the marquee says, ask me a question. Instead of having that hard-coded in there, I'm going to put the answer up in here. And then what I'm going to do is inside this marquee, I'm going to put a PHP block in here, and then I'm going to put that answer in there. So at this point, instead of hard coding the question, like ask me a question, I'm putting it up here in this answer area. So if I were to run this, if I refresh, it still looks the same. You know, it's the same thing. But now, if they do ask a question, boom, now I know that they did something and I can give them a response. So I'm going to start to work through that. So I've got my question. If they've got the question, that's good. If they don't, I'm just going to leave that blank. Just going to straighten this out. Okay, so I'm going to put some comments in here so that way I can understand. So it's starting to get a little bit longer and a little bit more confused. So what I want to know is, did they ask a question? That's going to be yes or no. If they asked a question, question will hold the question they asked. If they didn't ask a question, the question is going to be blank. Then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to fill up this array. So this array is going to be of possible responses to their question. Okay, so now we've got a list of possible responses. So now what I need to do is I need to start to actually figure out what response I'm going to use. So I'm going to say if my $question is equal to nothing, then I know they didn't really ask that question. So then the answer is just going to be ask me a question. Else, if for right now I'm just going to go else. Let's just keep this simple. I'm going to use the response. And for right now, I'm just going to hard code 4 just to test this. Okay, so I'm going to save this. Then I'm going to run this. If I refresh it, pi is hazy. So it doesn't matter what question I ask. So what would be nice is if my result stayed inside here. So my question stayed in there. So I'm gonna code that in. So I do have my question in a variable here called question. I just want to put my question back into my text box, so that way it persists. So here's my text box. My text box has a value. And my value, I can't just do that, otherwise it would be $question because that's HTML. So I need to actually plop in some PHP. So now if I save that, if I refresh this, so will I pass the class? So what I want to do is I want to make some rules in here. I want to say the question has to end with a question mark. If it doesn't end with a question mark, then I won't give a response back. All right. So let's work into that rule. It has to end in a question mark. So in order to do that, we're going to need to peel the string apart. And I'm going to do it right in here. So if they didn't ask a question, ask me a question. This is kind of where I was thinking about going here. Else give a response. Now I could nest a whole bunch, but I'm just going to add in an else if. Then I'm going to do an open closing paren, curly brace, curly brace. So else if the question, and there's a couple ways I could do this. I could be really lazy and I could check to see if there is a question mark anywhere in the string, all right? But what I want to do is I want to know the very last character. I want to know what the very last character is. So I'm going to go way up to the top here, and right below this question here, I'm just going to play for a second. So I'm going to do my exit, just so that way the rest of this won't load. So my question, I'm going to echo this out so we can see it. So I'm just going to refresh here. I'm going to say retry. Will I pass the class? So the last digit actually is a question mark. So what we can do is we can actually substring things and actually peel it apart. So by doing a substring, what we want to do is we want to substring the question, and if I do a comma, we can actually say, you know, what is the start? And I could say 5. All right. And I'm going to save that. So if I'm saying 5, I don't remember what my question was. Will I pass this class? So it goes 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if I refresh this, hmm, nothing there. SUBSTR. Oh, it's because I'm hitting this line. So for right now, just to play, I'm going to make a static string here. So I'm just going to make it so that way question is always equal to ask me a question with a question mark. Okay, so that way we always have a value in there. So the -1 basically will automatically jump to the end of the string. A lot of people want to get that last digit. That's what the -1 does. So I'm going to refresh. The world makes sense again. If I go back and put in that 5, and if I save that, then it actually will start parsing that string at 5 and then go to the rest of it. So THE, so 6, 7, 8, 9. So if I did 9, it would just be question. So if I refresh this again, there you go, I got a question. Okay, but the main thing we're looking for is, are they asking a question? The question has to end with a question mark, so that -1 will give us the ability to parse the string and find out what they're looking for. So as long as I can get that question mark, now I can evaluate, say, did it ask a question? Did the user ask a question? So that's what it's trying to show here. So I've got my substring, question -1. So I'm going to just delete this part that I was just messing around with, trying to show you what a substring is and how it works. So what I'm doing is, if they didn't ask a question, boom, the answer is going to be, ask me a question, you're done. Okay, else if we're substringing what they asked, looking at the last character, and if it is not equal to a question mark, then we're not going to give them a response. We're going to give them some snotty response like, ask me with a question mark. Okay, so let's give that a try. So I'm going to refresh this. Okay, so no question was asked. Ask me a question. Will I pass? Ask me with a question mark. Ask me with a question mark. So if ask with a question mark, reply is hazy. Please try again. So I want to be able to randomly choose a response here. Right now it's always giving me the same one. So that's because I hard-coded 4. And 4 is the reply is hazy. Please ask again. So what I want to do is I actually want to use some random. There's something called mtrand. And mtrand gives us a random number, and it's got a minimum and a maximum. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable. I'm just going to call it iResponse. And then my minimum is going to be a 0. My maximum is going to be a 14. And I'm going to put a semicolon at the end of it. And then instead of hard coding 4 in there, now we're going to get a number anywhere from 0 to 14. So I'm going to save that. If I ask, yes. Don't count on it. Okay, I got 2 yeses, so that's a good thing. So say no. All right. So the other thing I don't want is I don't want somebody being able to sit here and hit on this thing until they get the response they're looking for. So if they've asked the question once, they can't ask it again. All right. But I'll let them ask it again eventually. So will I pass? If I clicked again, I'd like to say ask a new question. So then if I say, will I pass the class and ask, then the answer is yes. And then they could go back to, will I pass? But basically, I just want to cache the last question asked and find out if they actually ask that question already. So in order to do that, I need to use something called a session variable. Basically, it's a variable that's going to exist on the server that will persist the longevity of the page. So it'll last the session. So all right, so in order to use session variables, the first thing that's required is you have to start the session. So you type in something called session_start, and it needs to be very, very topmost. So as soon as you open that PHP page, right here, you do a session start. So once you do this, now you can use sessions within your page. So what I'm going to do is I want to somehow cache the question. So once we are here, we've got the question, and that's good. But I want to know what the last question was. So once we're down here, life is good. We didn't fail any of our tests. And then what I want to do is I want to save the question that was being used to get this response. So the way I do this is I use a server-side variable. So it starts with a $sign, then an underscore, and then it's going to be a session. And then I'm going to use a square bracket. I'm going to give it a name. It's a key. It's going to be basically another associative array, so I'm going to give it something to name that I can store. So I'm just going to call this thing previous question. Okay, prev_quest, good enough. And that is going to be equal to my $question. Okay, so that question, now we're sticking it up in the server memory. So now we've got it. So now when they come through here, I'm just going to add another else if. I'm going to do it before we hit the last else statement. Else if. Okay, so I want to know now if I access this before it's set, I could get an error message. So I don't want to do that. So I want to come up here and I want to do another if is set. So I'm going to do an if is set, and I want to say, is this session set? If it's set, then I'm going to create a variable called previous question, and I'm going to take it out of the session variable and put it inside my local variable. Else, I'm just going to load it equal to nothing, so that way. So sometimes when you access something, if there's no value in there, it can cause a problem. So it's always best just to, is set gives you the ability to kind of peek in there saying, hey, is there something in there? If there is, I want it. If there isn't, thanks for letting me know. So if there's something in there, we'll grab it. If there isn't, then we'll just load up our local variable with a blank string. So even though it's getting loaded with what looks like nothing, all right, it's actually a blank string, which is different than null, or the absence of something. All right, so it's kind of weird, but that's a safe way of doing it. So this is actually a really safe way of doing it. So now, if it had a previous question, it would have been loaded here because we would have crammed it in the session variable. We came around the reload, it got filled in, and now we can say if the previous question is equal to the question, $question, then we have the ability to give them a different snotty response. I'm going to say, please ask a new question. A bunch of exclamation points, they know I mean it. Look at that. All right. So if I save this, ask me a question. I'm just going to tidy that up too. Okay, so I'm going to save this. I'm going to refresh this. Don't count on it. Will I pass? Click on it. Please ask a new question. So if I keep on doing that, it's going to keep on saying, please ask a new question. Will I pass the class? Wow, don't count on it. Please ask a new question. So will I pass the PHP class? Wow. My sources say no, it doesn't look good for me, pals. All right, but at this point, I think I've got some really good logic in there. If they don't have that question mark, ask with a question mark. If they do have the question mark in there, it's good. Please ask a new question. Can't ask the same question twice. will I pass the PHP class? Sources is hazy. Please try again. So there's a lot of really good things that we did in here. Introduced you to sessions. All right, so it's just a variable that will exist and be held on the server. And we also covered arrays, both associative and indexed arrays. Got into isSet. isSet's a good thing. We're going to be using that quite a bit more as we move forward. Got into substringing, and then we got into some craziness, and we even found a use for the marquee. So anyways, hopefully you found this video helpful.